Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the one and only Awakener podcast. Before we begin, if this is your first show, you're going to be lost. This is a high IQ podcast, an advanced podcast, and we talk about really the meat and bones about what is happening, which is there's a war happening. It's like the Matrix, right? The guy takes the red pill, all of a sudden he's like, this is the real world. The real world that you live in is more than just what you think you have, your car, your home, and all these wonderful things that surround you that are giant distractions like sports, etc. You are involved in a total all-out war between two societies and powers for control of who is going to basically rule this planet. Historically, they have roots that go back hundreds and hundreds of years, which I could explain to you and make this podcast into an hour-long show. But I like to keep it brief and concise so you don't get lost. So let's talk about the latest events. And as you know, I talk about what I think is important at the time. Sometimes I don't talk about the latest things on the news because I don't think they're relevant and important, and I don't want to distract from what actually is happening. So I guess this is going to be a show really about detailing the conspiracy and really what I saw, which was Ezra Levant talking to Chrystia Freeland, and Chrystia Freeland says, "Oh, are you guys a bunch of Russian bots?" or whatever she said, which is really interesting. So let's go back in time and let's go back to where Barack Obama set up this entire Russian fiasco to blame us. They are blaming us for what they themselves are guilty of. They are blaming us for being Russian assets. They're telling their followers that we must be working for the Russians because we are sowing discord into kind of our democracy and the system, the way that it works with. But they're not the ones that enforce, they're not ones interested in enforcing democracy. They are interested in shutting down any right to protest and any kind of dissenting thought or any kind of polarizing view by saying we're enemy assets. No, we're not. They're the ones working with the Russians. It's very easy to see. Unplug your banana ears, as Yuri Bezmenov said. If you unplug your banana ears and you stop looking at all the distractions and all the daily news and you want to actually understand what is happening, if you live in America, Canada, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, etc., you live in the Western world. You live in a US backed system. The US system protects the rest of these nations and allies and has a kind of fiscal system that dominates over it. This system is protected by the US military industrial complex, a military that is designed to basically keep status quo. This military complex, since 1945, think about a tug of war or think about an arm wrestle. This military complex has had the upper hand in this tug of war. We have had all the nuclear weapons to basically destroy all our enemies since the 1950s. Why hasn't it happened? I believe actually Winston Churchill himself came up with a plan, Operation Unthinkable, to go all the way to Moscow once we had the nuclear bomb and destroy all the communists once and for all. Go back to the Cold War. John MacArthur had a plan to use nukes against the Chinese, which destroyed the Chinese because we had that power and we didn't do this to them. Why didn't we do this to them, ladies and gentlemen? It's because we have some sympathy, which means, yes, we have military operations, and yes, we've overthrown nations, and yes, we've done things, but it's for the purpose of bringing good to this world. And we have kind of, I guess, because we've been kind of moral in the sense of we didn't want to exterminate or destroy our enemies completely, we have just left it as is. Versus most people can't understand that there's a flip side to this coin, and Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and crew have their own complex, which they would love to change this arm wrestle over to where they have the upper hand and they have destroyed us. Now, how would they do that? Like I've told you in various podcasts, taking Israel, taking Taiwan, taking North Korea, taking South Korea, it's not that easy. It's not so simple as the Chinese just invading Taiwan. It turns into a full-blown war. South Korea joins in, Japan joins in. Before you know it, the US has to protect them. And before you know it, nuclear bombs are in use. And China can't beat us in the thermonuclear exchange. So Russia has to come. And if Russia's going to come, why isn't Iran going to come too? And why aren't the Islamists going to come to destroy Israel? It's all about a war. The method to this war is not the same for us as it is to them. We might show up with our aircraft carriers and our airplanes and our F-35s, and we have all the tools to basically destroy our enemy that way. But they don't operate the same way. They operate in the shadows and the darkness, and they manipulate and they lie according to what outcome they want to achieve. So what is really this conspiracy? We are at war with a communist conspiracy that seeks to destroy and dismantle this world by first destroying the USA. Now, I'm going to go all the way back in time like I do every single time on this podcast. It's really easy to see. Let's look at Chrystia Freeland as a perfect example of this. So why is it that if the Iron Curtain was truly collapsed, if the Iron Curtain fell, why is it that all these leftists are promoting communist propaganda to us? You know, if you went back to the 1980s, Palestine and all this stuff there was not a movement whatsoever. Because if you ever did that, you were considered a traitor to the Western world. Now, it's all front and center. So if it is actually enemy propaganda against our system, who is funding it all? Well, the answer is George Soros and his organizations. And Chrystia Freeland or politicians are a perfect example of this. Chrystia Freeland goes all the way back to obviously Ukraine and obviously working for George Soros and his groups before the Iron Curtain collapsed. They even said, oh, Chrystia Freeland wasn't allowed into Russia at a certain time because the KGB was surveilling her and all this wonderful things. Well, all of a sudden, as soon as the Iron Curtain collapses, she can go in there into Moscow and she can work there as a journalist for a number of years. And over she comes back to Canada. These people, ladies and gentlemen, are all a lie. You know, Ukraine's government is dominated by this International Renaissance Foundation, which is run by Open Society Foundation's George Soros. These groups, ever since the Iron Curtain collapse, are the face of the Soviet takeover. They act on various military agendas and things that are done by the enemy to advance their agenda. For example, COVID was done by the Chinese, and the conspiracy used it as a giant attempt to advance their agenda. Now, let me go back and let me explain it one more time for you. The Iron Curtain collapse was faked. It was done by George Soros and his groups, which then obviously took over the government of Ukraine, various other governments around the Western world. They took control of the United States of America in 1993 and infiltrated that way. They took control of Canada and the European Union and a bunch of other nations through a coup d'etat from Barack Obama, who was placed in the White House to act for George Soros and his groups. And here we are, ladies and gentlemen. That's why, if you really, really, really understand what is happening, Chrystia Freeland herself is a Russian asset. All these people who are working for the establishment government in the Western world, which is funded by George Soros and crew, are Russian assets working to advance the communist agenda on the Western world. And once you see that and once you understand it, because it's easily, your banana ears and your senses should tell you, I mean, listen, if your wife is cheating on you, there should be some kind of sense in your kind of soul that something is not right. This story she tells me don't make any sense. Well, the stories they're telling you, all these people know it on the right. They're not making any sense. Why? Like I told you, they are the front, which means the Russians have used various organizations and shell companies, etc., to advance and control the Western world through a whole case of blackmailed and controlled politicians and a fiscal agenda. This has involved billions and billions and billions of dollars. Therefore, taking Taiwan and taking Israel and taking Europe has already been a slow process of war that has been happening for the last 40 years that nobody has really identified and knows about. That is, they've been feeding us this propaganda for so many years. They started teaching about this in the media. They started overthrowing media organizations, newspapers. They've started putting leftist people. One of their pros, actually, is that most people on the left can't identify their agenda as communism, but they're so hardcore leftist. They don't have any kind of dissenting viewpoint and they don't understand anything else but, oh, the right must be fascist. Okay. So these people are the ones who go and work for, obviously, newspapers and various organizations. And not necessarily they understand that they are actually Soviet agents, because they're not. They just are de facto, by the crap that comes out of their mouth, aiding and abetting this conspiracy. Let's take Canada, for example. How many people do I think actually know what's going on? Very few. I believe there's less than 50 people in Canada in total that truly know that there's a war going on and the intricacies about it. Chrystia Freeland, Mark Carney, Justin Trudeau, and we could go through, obviously, the head of the RCMP and the head of the Canadian military and various other people that are put in charge by the Prime Minister. Beyond that, a lot of people inside the Liberal Party and leftists don't understand what's going on. They don't understand that this Soviet agenda this leftist agenda is carried by a Soviet military agenda designed to collapse the Western world. Now, as I've talked about many times in this podcast, and why I repeat a lot of things is because it's a refresher point. So their goal, obviously, number one, which they would love to have, the best kind of warfare is the kind where you don't have to fire a single bullet. Ideally, if they had been in charge, they would have liked to manipulate us to the point where they could have torn up, obviously, the Bill of Rights and torn up whatever document and whatever thing they wanted to do in the United States of America as well, and kind of just had their government, because the majority of people love the social communist utopia. Well, unfortunately, that hasn't happened. So their next job, if that doesn't work, is to have a forcible revolution or a violent changeover of power. Now, that obviously is through a military point of view, economic point of view, and obviously COVID was the start of that. But there is more coming, ladies and gentlemen, that people do not understand. Yes, I've talked about North Korea EMPs, Iran EMPs, and what I believe is that the whole case of what is happening is that the Soviets and Chinese, they cannot use these EMP weapons because they've signed on to the Outer Space Treaty, which means there would be hell on earth to pay. But they are using these rogue regimes, obviously Iran and North Korea, as the instigators and kind of the focal points of using these EMPs. Because if we lose these regimes, it's not kind of like it doesn't destroy us completely. However, if we lost Russia or we lost China, wow, our agenda would be set back so many years. So they are the ones being kind of pushed to using this agenda to provide the revolution and the violent takeover, which means there's going to be an attempt for seizure of government. And you can see it. The left is absolutely batshit crazy. They are ludicrous. And they will do far worse than January 6th very soon once they are given the opportunity on a silver platter to remove maybe Trump from office. Now, this is going to be a very interesting time I've talked about for many different years. And the reason why I keep talking about is things have been happening so slowly that eventually we are at the point. I'm going to do another episode on Iran and North Korea shortly. That was my computer in the background. But if you want to kind of tune into that, you'll get the second part of the story. So remember, the conspiracy requires our enemies to put forward a covert military agenda which benefits them. I've explained how COVID came in a lab, and the conspiracy here in the Western world used COVID as the operation, even though the military objective came from China. So we'll talk about that later on. So just to recap, this is the all-out war we're in. We're facing a hidden enemy, ladies and gentlemen, something that people cannot see, and it really is a whole kind of covert Soviet agenda to wipe out everything that they disagreed with in the world and to kind of have their communist utopia, how does it say? So to understand this in further detail, you need to go to the Awakener.ca. The Awakener.ca is a vast resource for you to fully understand what is happening. Why is Canada acting the way it is? Well, it's because they work for Soros and his groups and the Russians. Why is it that Ukraine is begging for war? And why is it that the European Union and all these European leaders are so hell-bent on war with Ukraine and Russia? Why? It's because they work for Soros. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Zelensky works for Soros, and the money that comes in is all laundered, and it all goes back for leftist communism in the US, and it all funds Vladimir Putin and his also personal endeavors. What else, ladies and gentlemen? There's so much more I could talk about it. I could talk about the Palestinian movement, but let's just leave it at that for now. And we're going to come back for another show where we talk about Iran and North Korea shortly. Have yourself a wonderful weekend. Bye for now.